Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back. Welcome back, everybody, to the Live from the Heartland show. I'm Michael James here in the 49th Ward in the great city of Chicago. And one of the things we try to do on this show is to talk to longtime activists. And usually they're people I've known pretty well. They're my friends. And today we're going to talk with our friend James W. Russell, who was on the show a long time ago, I think, with a wonderful book called Escape from Texas, about a slave that escapes. And I really liked it. He has another book out now called Labor Guide to Retirement, which we're going to have him back on. Today, we're going to get a little bit of his movement history, and we're going to hear about when integration came to Sand Springs, Oklahoma, and the great state of Oklahoma, which was really great when it was more socialist. Now it's pretty right-wing. But James grew up there in Tulsa, was involved in the Congress of Racial Equality, and he has some stories to tell. So hello to you, brother.
Hi, Mike. Very good to be on your show.
Very good to have you back. And you heard the introduction, so let's take it away. Why don't you give us a little bit of your movement history, and then we're going to focus today on CORE in Tulsa with the early sit-in and the integration of the Sand Springs, Oklahoma schools, and one of the people there who is perhaps the greatest dribbler in the world ever.
Well, in 1960, my preferred candidate for president was Richard Nixon. By 1964, I had gone so far left that none of the candidates were acceptable to me. So I went through the incredible period of change through the movement. I was involved in starting an SDS chapter, University of Oklahoma. Then where I grew up in Tulsa, the Congress of Racial Equality started sit-ins in 1964, which were the last major sit-ins of the civil rights movement before the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which made that issue moot. And during those sit-ins, I got arrested a couple of times. And then I don't know if you want me to go on to the Sand Springs story, because that comes after. Save it. Okay.
And do you want to tell us any more of your little bit of movement history? I know we met when you were at the SDS office, or
Right.
sometime in there, back in about '66, I think.
Yeah, I remember it very well. You took us to the Chicago Art Museum, and we saw a Giacometti exhibit.
Oh, nice.
And that was just very wow for me. Yeah, so I remember that quite a bit.
Well, you went on to be a professor, and you've written 9 books, and you taught in Mexico at the National University. You taught in Czechoslovakia. You taught in San Francisco. You taught at UTEP in Texas.
Right.
And you also were in Connecticut for a while, my home state, which I always liked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I got from today when doing a little research and looking up stuff and going back and forth with you on emails was something I didn't know, that what is credited as the first lunch counter sit-ins were probably in Greensboro, North Carolina. And they were, I think, at a Woolworth, but I'm not sure. And you talk about the CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, which I remember well. Tell us a little bit about those sit-ins and then how you ended up in Sand Springs.
The sit-ins took place in 1958 in Oklahoma City. They were led by the NAACP, by a woman who is very, very famous in Oklahoma civil rights, Clara Luper, a really wonderful woman. And the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-ins were in 1960. And those are the ones that people usually credit as the beginning of the sit-in movement, but Oklahoma City preceded it by a couple of years. I've since found out that there were actually kind of sit-ins right after World War II as well. So I'm not sure who is the first in all of this.
We're glad for all of them.
Right. But the Oklahoma City ones were, I think, very important. And for a while, I was using the formulation that Oklahoma had the first and the last sit-ins of the civil rights movement, because the Tulsa ones were in 1964, right before the Civil Rights Act. I mean, I think it's a great formulation, but it might not be entirely true.
Well, you were pretty young then. How did you end up getting involved with CORE? And let me ask you, I know you mentioned that your first presidential candidate was the wicked Richard Nixon, but were your parents progressive? What led you to end up turning from Nixon to becoming a civil rights-oriented activist guy and getting involved with CORE and sit-ins in Tulsa?
Well, I mean, I was not a red diaper baby or anything like that. My parents, as far as I could make out, were pretty much apolitical. If there were anything, they were moderate Republicans. My mother was from the South. Okay. In fact, you may remember this, Mike. There was a time in the 1950s when every kid was wearing a Civil War hat.
Oh yeah, I wore the Confederate one till I found out what the war was about.
Well, I started wearing the Union cap, and my parents required that I change it for the Confederate cap.
Oh.
And I was the only one who was doing that. So it's a Southern family, or at least part of it was, and so I have a lot of family stories like that about the South. So I'm not a sort of typical person to go to the left. Well, maybe there are
a lot of lefties come from that.
Yeah, but
or out of the military. Remember there were a lot of military brats in SDS.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just became hyper political, even while I was for Nixon. And then as I read more, I became more persuaded by left-wing articles and people like Tom Hayden and pamphlets and so forth. And, within a couple of years was involved in SDS. And at the same time, the sit-ins were going on in Tulsa. And so, I was sort of going back and forth between Norman, where the University of Oklahoma is, and Tulsa, during those days.
So what happens when you're doing a little research? There was a lot of listing of things about what was going on in Sand Springs and the circumstances in the school. And I think it was you who, at a CORE meeting after you had a victory, raised the people were talking about what do we do next? And I think that you're the one that came up with maybe let's look at Sand Springs.
Yeah, I mean, I went to high school in Tulsa. And after I graduated and went off to the University of Oklahoma, my mother, who worked in Sand Springs, which was quite a drive away, then moved to Sand Springs. Okay, so I would then come home from college to Sand Springs, for the vacations and so forth. And I noticed that the town was deeply segregated, that there was one school for all Black students from kindergarten all the way up to senior high school. Meanwhile, for whites, there was a regular 3 different schools for, elementary and junior high school, and that the high school had just been built 5 years earlier. So it was a very modern high school for that time. And it had, many more course opportunities and so forth. So, I'm this SDS member in the summer in Sand Springs, and I write a letter to the newspaper, saying that this ought to be changed. And I get a phone call from the editor. It was very nice, but he said they couldn't print that letter. It was just way too controversial. Okay. so, so anyway, so I brought it up in the core meeting. A couple of Black core members came up, said they'd help. We met in my house, 612 McKinley Street in Sand Springs. Still remember the address?
That's what you say in the movie too.
Right. Yeah, well,
there is a movie about this that he made.
Yeah. So then we walked down across the tracks. The Black part of town was literally on the other side of the tracks, right? Okay, and this is really, there are probably not more than 400 people living there. It's a very small pocket. So this story, okay, about civil rights is hardly one of the major victories or anything like that. It's a complete footnote, but it was a very interesting one. And so we started knocking on doors, found out that a lot of people were interested in being able to go up to the senior high school. But there was something of a clash between the teachers, okay, who were kind of the upper class of the community, and other parents. I mean, the teachers were rightly worried about their jobs. Okay, the other parents were worried about having the best education possible for their children. So we end up going out to this area outside of Sand Springs, and we're knocking on doors there. I mean, these are houses with no electricity, no indoor plumbing. Okay, and they say, well, you ought to go talk to Mr. Haynes. Okay, well, Mr. Haynes was Marcus Haynes. I knew who Mr. Haynes was. So we go to a very nice house, okay, and knock on the door. Nobody's home. Leave a note saying there's going to be a community meeting that night, actually, and not expecting him to get this note, but it's okay. And so we're at the meeting at a church. The church is packed with people, okay, and there's an argument going back and forth, about whether it's a good idea to, go for integration of the schools. And, and then somebody stands up and says, well, our school's good enough. We've had a lot of people who are very successful, including Marcus Haynes. Okay, at that point, somebody in the back goes, I want to speak. I want to speak. And this man walks down to the front, turns around, and he says, I'm Marcus Haynes. Okay, and it's true, I've been very successful in life, but it was because I had a very unusual talent. I never wanted to be a basketball player. This is what's so strange about this story. I never wanted to be a basketball player. I wanted to be a printer. The white school had a printing program, but we didn't have a printing program, so I could never become a printer. Okay, so he wins the argument hands down.
Slam dunk, as you said in an article.
Yeah, a dunk, right? Okay. Okay. And he's selected as the spokesman for the group. Now, we, the core members, are just kind of, doing what community organizers do. We're agitating, right? Getting people to do something, okay? And so we go to the school board meeting. He presents the case, okay, and the school board refuses to integrate. Okay, then we decide what to do. The next morning, we file the first complaint in Oklahoma under the new Civil Rights Act about the school system. They call back, the attorney, U.S. attorney for the Tulsa area calls back, and the school board collapses. I mean, he basically tells them they have no legal, leg to stand on in this, they collapse and the school becomes integrated. Okay, and that whole thing takes place in about 3 weeks. It's totally.
Man, I wish they were all that easy.
You're right, right. It would be good if all things were that easy. Now, the coda to the story, two codas. One is 30 years later, I ran into Marcus Haynes in Connecticut. Okay, when he's 65, it's the last year in which he's playing with his team, the Harlem Magicians, kind of going from town to town, playing for Little League money raisers, whatever. Okay, and so I go up to him and I say, "We met in Sand Springs," and kind of goes like that. And then I remind him of the civil rights thing, and this huge smile comes over his face, and he says, "That's one of the proudest things I ever did." Now, this is a guy who's world famous, who has an enormous amount of things to be proud of. Okay, and that was important, very important to him. The other coda is that I lost all contact with those people. And then in the last few years, we put together a project to find the students who integrated. We did. We pushed the school to put up a historical marker for that, which they did. And then, we had a meeting to dedicate it, and I made the film about those two things.
Is there any way people can watch that film, or do they got to go through your website, which is, you could tell people what that is? I know you sent me a link and I watched it and I'll save it. But when I put the link into Google or something, I didn't get access.
Yeah, we're not quite ready to just let it out there.
Okay.
There is a preview. If anybody goes to my website, you can buy a DVD for $20 of it. And if you're a reporter or something like that, I'll send you a link. So there are ways to get to it, but we're not quite ready to put it on YouTube.
Do you plan to do that?
Eventually.
Good. Yeah, it's a nice little film. It's a half hour and you have a lot of the people there. The class president, a white guy,
Right.
Talks about it, and they talk about a number of people talk about how they were sort of shocked about what people had to go through. They didn't know about it. It's a nice little film. It's uplifting. And while I'm at it, I don't know if I already brought it up, but did I already talk about the Madison film?
You just touched on it. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a film about the TAs in Madison.
That's on YouTube.
No. And what is that called?
The Wisconsin TA strike.
Have you made any other films besides these two?
No.
I had no idea. It's inspiring me to make short films or to get my kid to do some. But I think it's good for people to see these things.
Yeah, I think if you have a good story, even if you're not a professional filmmaker, you can figure out how to do the basics of it, which is what I did. I'm not a professional filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of writing. One thing I did, I didn't know a lot about Marcus Haynes. I did look up his daughter is married to Drew Pearson on the Dallas Cowboys. His son is plays for the Carolina Panthers. I think they're the last team in the league these days. But I saw some footage, which is included in your film, of him doing all kind of amazing dribbling things that no one else used to do. I have a good friend, Russ Bradford. He's also an author, and he was a coach at UTEP and at New Mexico State. And he told me, I asked him, did he know Marcus Haynes? And he said, no, but one of my former players at Moorhead Junior High, I don't know where that is, went on to play college hoops at Langston University, a historical Black college university, which is where Marcus Haynes went to. And so he knew about him. And he said this kid that he had was one of the few white players there, et cetera, et cetera. Let me ask you in the time we have left to tell us briefly about your latest book, A Labor Guide to Retirement, but not too much because we're going to have you back to go into it in depth. And give us a little, a little synopsis.
Retirement plans are extraordinarily boring for most people. So it's kind of a hard sell to get people interested in them, but they're really, really important. If assuming that you don't want to spend your final years as a greeter at Walmart, okay, that you want to have some, ability to carry on living the way that you're accustomed to. And we do have a retirement crisis in this country because 401k plans have not been sufficient. Old-fashioned pensions were great, and they continue to be great for a lot of people, including myself. So there's a lot to be known about retirement plans, including Social Security, which is the best plan we have going. But there are a lot of bad interests who would like to even eliminate Social Security so that we're all just really, going into retirement with hardly anything.
Miserable.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk more about that. You will come back on, I hope.
Love to.
Good. That'll be great. And we'll do that. And I would like to ask you about Oklahoma and its rightward shift and what's going on, but we'll save that for the next time. So James W. Russell, longtime activist, wonderful human being. It's great to have you on, and I want to really thank you and wish you well. And I will be in touch with you in the next few days about booking another date.
Great.